Hi, I'm Don Norris, and welcome to another brand episode of BrandVertising, the show that goes behind the scenes of the marketing, branding, and advertising worlds. In past episodes, we've looked at brand activation with the president of Spider Marketing Solutions, Rico DiGiovanni, and we've talked to Jane Price about social media. Jane's background was she was sort of the leading edge of how Intel gets involved in social media. Rico, we looked at how Mattel, Campbell's, several other brands use brand activation to connect with consumers. Today, I want to move away from the disciplines, the marketing toolbox that marketers can look at, of which brand activation and social media play a very important role. And I want to focus on a marketplace, an incredibly exciting marketplace. When I was in Asia for 12 years prior to coming back to Canada, I spent many evenings in this wonderful city and this wonderful country. Today I want to talk about India. To me, India and China are both racing for power and control of the marketing communications world. And probably both will end up at different points, but for very similar reasons. Both very smart people, very industrious, and have nothing but potential in front of them. So today we're going to talk about India. I'm going to talk with a gentleman named Praveen Kenneth. Praveen is the chairman of Law & Kenneth, an Indian-based marketing communications consultancy and advertising agency. Praveen and his group are doing some amazing things in India, sort of rocking the world of the big multinationals there. And when they came on, many people didn't think they'd be able to dent what was happening with the multinationals. But they've really changed. Changed the game, changed the face of the Indian advertising industry. And I think you're going to find it really interesting when you hear my conversation that I had with Praveen earlier this week via Skype. To set the scene, I'm going to go to one of my favorite sites, which I've talked to you guys about before, which is adsoftheworld.com. And on there's a great clip of a case study done by McCann Erickson in India for a chicken chain. And it's about brand activation. And it shows how such a simple idea with a great, simple, focused execution can drive home a brand and the point that they're trying to make about that brand. As you watch this video, some of you that may have been to India will be refreshed about the beauty of it and how simple and elegant in many ways the country is. For those of you that haven't been there, focus on how simple this idea is. It's not technology gone crazy. It's not social media gone over the top. It's a basic, simple idea driving a simple point. When we come back from this video, you'll see the interview I had with Praveen Kenneth from Law & Kenneth, and we'll talk to you after that. Bye now. Hello, my guest today on BrandVertising is a gentleman named Praveen Kenneth. Praveen I worked with, full disclosure, Praveen I worked with back in the 1990s when I was heading up the Coca-Cola business in McCann Erickson, Southeast and West Asia. And it's the sort of South Asia part where I got him introduced to Praveen. Praveen worked for McCann running the Coca-Cola business or working on the Coca-Cola business, and he reported in to me every so often when we talked about regional issues, regional co-campaigns, etc. So that's when I first ran into Praveen. Praveen is the chairman of an agency called Lawn Kenneth. And Lawn Kenneth is a fantastic Indian advertising agency with offices in 5 cities in India. And Praveen, after working with me, I guess I gave him great talent or something, he went on to become the youngest head of an advertising agency for Publicis of their India operations. He was 29 at the time, where he was the general manager of the Publicis India operations. After doing that for a few years, because he had star power written all over him, he got involved with who I think is one of the fantastic agencies of the time anyways, was St. Luke's. And St. Luke's was a really aggressive, independent, new model advertising agency based in London. And Praveen was working with them on a variety of issues, especially with a focus on India. And at that time, when he was working with them, one of the major partners and founders of St. Luke's, a guy named Mr. Law, got together with Praveen and said, you know, I want to try something different. Praveen wanted to try something different. And they got together and formed Lawn Kenneth in around 2004. Lawn Kenneth is the advertising agency that I'm talking about. Praveen is our guest today. We have a lot of fantastic things to talk about. Praveen is a star. He is a guru, in my mind, of what's going on in the South Asian advertising aspects and globally, how to work with clients. Lawn Kenneth broke a lot of barriers, shook the trees. A lot of agencies weren't that scared. Multinational agencies weren't that scared at first when Lawn Kenneth came along, but now I believe they look at it quite differently as Lawn Kenneth has gone to take on some fantastic local clients and some multinational clients and does amazing work, a true independent. So I'd love to welcome Praveen to the show. Praveen, welcome to BrandVertising, mate.
Thanks, Don. Thanks for getting me on board.
So,
it's a pleasure for such a long time.
Well, I appreciate you being there, given that, what is it? I think we're talking 8:30 at night in Mumbai as we're 9 o'clock.
8:45.
Oh, sorry, we're a little bit late.
It's dark outside.
Well, listen, Praveen, listen, mate. One of the questions I wanted to start off with is, what's your take on the advertising world these days? Many years ago we worked together. A lot of water's gone under the bridge, as they say. What's your take on the advertising industry from a global perspective and maybe even what's going on in India?
Well, Don, much has changed in the last 15 years. I think the reason why we all got in advertising 20 years ago is totally different today because when we were much younger, it used to be much sexier, much more exciting. It's all about being creative constantly. But I think one of the fundamental shifts that's happened is that it's become much more demanding. And there's a paradox, being exciting, sexy, and new age as a business to being responsible. I think that's been a huge paradox and a shift in the business, Don.
So you're saying before we weren't responsible, Praveen?
I think there was responsibility, but I think the premise was us being more focused on bringing the best from ourselves, which actually made it a fantastic fit in terms of what we could bring in, which actually made sense to people around us, versus now people demand what they expect out of us. And so I think that's a fundamental change, Don.
Well, let's talk about those people then for a minute, Praveen. What are clients saying to you today that you didn't hear 2 years ago, let alone 5 years ago?
Well, if you don't perform, I'm going to find somebody else better. So I think the clients are much more brutal today than they used to be 20 years ago. The essence of partnership. The clients used to actually tickle the creative people to be a part of creative answers to the problem. But I think today clients demand. I think the demand has become that much more brutal. So is there fun in the business? There is still fun in the business as long as you kind of get over the conversation with the procurement guys from the client end.
Right.
And from there on, I think it's a different ballgame altogether. But that's the pain point because you lose so much of juice in that conversation. Rest becomes a trade. So as much as I'm optimistic about the business, I think the trade, the way we used to function 20 years ago, it's changed drastically today.
You said
And
if you don't perform, the client says if you don't perform, you're gone.
yeah.
How do they define performing? Is it ideally, you've got some sort of metrics that are being measured, and that's all we hear these days in this online world. Hey, I can deliver metrics, and traditional can't deliver metrics. How are you measuring performance, and how are they defining performance?
Don, it's pretty interesting. I was actually reading this article this morning. The lifespan of CEOs has reduced from 6 to 7 years to close to 3 years in the last 5 years.
Right.
Okay, so the CEOs just have 3 years today versus 6 or 7 years, 20 years ago to deliver. So when the CEO comes in with his new marketing team, he gives extremely specific tasks in terms of ensuring things get delivered. So he's focused on saying, I need results from the time I start running. And the pressure that comes in on those assignments, Don, are miserable. Brands like Coke, you built relationships over a period of 5, 6, 10, 20, 30, 50 years. There's an expectation which flows from understanding of where the marketing and the brand is moving. I think today's day and age, clients are changing with the younger brands. They need results like yesterday morning. So I think the fundamental pressure has changed, and the need or the expectation for the client to be a little more patient has changed completely.
That must have an impact then on brand building versus sales. I mean, the constant dilemma that was always there. I want to build the brand, and many clients go, I don't have time to build the brand. I got to get sales now, and a lot of people not understanding you have to do the both at the same time. So are brands allowed to develop in that part of the world then?
I think the reason why younger brands die faster is because clients are focusing purely on making sales. I'm seeing that happening in many brands in India, and I can't name those few brands, is clients are having mobile phone as an industry, for example. Nokia was dominant. Motorola was dominant in India. Then there were a bunch of young Indian entrepreneurs discovered that they could actually get the same phone from China, 50% cheaper, branded, focus purely on selling it rather than building a brand. And so you have this series of mobile brands in the country today which are purely focusing on selling rather than building a brand. So what we spend time in terms of trying to say creating value proposition and engaging and building a relationship with the client or with the consumer over a period of 5, 6, 10 years' time, those conversations have become much, much more lesser today, Don.
Are they selling if they're talking about prices, or at least a brand being built around it? I'm sure that's what firms like yourself are trying to say to them, right? In the sense that, hey, we can still sell, but we have to be able to build a brand along this, whether it's we sell a certain manner or there's certain price points we want to drive and own. Or is there a combination, or is it just we're just going to drive price?
I would call it brand selling rather than brand building, Don.
Right.
I had this conversation with a client of mine last week. He's saying, I'm more interested in selling my brand. So can we call it brand selling rather than brand building? Because there's no point in me building a brand if I can't sell the brand.
No, I understand.
So I think I would call it brand selling, where it's got to sell if it's going to be a brand, rather than it's got to be a brand if it's going to sell. So I think that's the fundamental shift.
Take me through you're in your part of the world, and maybe you have a picture. I'm sure you have a picture from a global perspective as well. Where are clients going in terms of what they're demanding and expecting out of their advertising agencies? And is there a difference between a global demand and a more independent creative shop like yourself and what's being asked for? Do the lines blur between traditional and non-traditional? What's sort of the trend in what you're hearing from clients and folks around the watering cooler?
Okay, Don, again, I'm kind of going back 15 years, 20 years, and again kind of coming back. I think the sense of urgency has changed expectations of an agency. So today, look at it, 5 years ago, digital was a different company altogether. Today, advertising, digital, outdoor, every single thing comes in one single basket. So you're no more a specialist. You've gone back to being generalists. And we did some big story a couple of years ago trying to make digital a specialist organization. It worked. We made huge leaps in terms of our revenues. Eventually, the world caught up, and so we went back into being an integrated organization. It is changing for a simple perspective, saying that Indians are actually waking up to brand building. Right. Whereas the Western world is realizing that they're going to start selling in Asian markets because brand building is important, but Asians are getting better products, whereas brand building does not necessarily relate to great product at great price. So price parameters are actually differentiating the market in the Asian markets today now.
Yeah, well, in my mind, that price point's kind of always been there. It's built in a lot of Asian advertising and way consumers went. Like, first, it's got to be a good price. Then I'll start to look for brand points. And the pricing models of marketing departments in Asia, in Southeast Asia, Southwest Asia, it's always been a challenge because there's just so many competitors there. What about, you talk about this whole issue of agencies going back to sort of being generalists, which arguably is where advertising was originally, right? I mean,
absolutely.
You did it all.
Absolutely. Well, I think we need to kind of keep finding new stories to keep the business called advertising alive, Don.
Yes.
And I think we need newer ideas constantly to make ourselves more relevant, because we as a business has become such a large open-ended pipe that there are many of us. There's not one of us. There are many of us out there who can actually give client solutions. Can we give the answers consistently is the key question. And I think where we stand today and where agencies stand in the market today is that as long as we can be consistent in offering, then we have a place to exist.
How are you differentiating yourself versus the Ogilvies and the McCanns and these Indian powerhouses? How are you standing out? How have you been able to grow? I mean, you've won some multinationals pitching against these guys, and here you are, this strong independent. In my mind, you're kind of the Whedon and Kennedy there of India. So Whedon and Kennedy may not like that because I know they're now there, but I respect what you guys have been able to do, and you've shaken a few trees. How have you been able to separate yourselves? I mean, we both worked at the big multinationals. We know how we try to position other people in pitches, and I'm sure they've told many stories, and you continually seem to be able to cut through those.
Yeah. I think, Don, I think we kind of walked ourselves pretty luckily into something called offering business solutions rather than just brand solutions.
Right.
Okay, so when I said business solution, we actually sat with the client and actually went about creating brands for the client rather than the client coming and giving us a brief. So when we got into the business solution, for example, we have a client, it's called Ken, one of the largest water purifiers in the marketplace today in the country, second largest fundamentally. And we actually sit across the table and actually sit and figure out how to actually maximize distribution, how to actually maximize sales force attrition in the marketplace. So we've actually moved away from being 30-second television commercial makers or a print ad manufacturer or a digital design company. We've actually gone much deeper into partnering the client with his problems. So we actually go deeper into solving clients' problems rather than giving just pure communication solution. For me, Don, that actually differentiated us in the market.
Why is that believable from you? I mean, it's interesting because I agree, and I can see how that would differentiate. I just know, and you know, from this is McCann and Ogilvy have been saying, trying to sell that story for a while, right? And sometimes they do it well. That we're not just going to give you a 30-second ad. We're going to think about your business. Why have you been able to actually deliver on it and get buy-in and traction from clients going, you know what? I think you guys can do that. Not just a bunch of lip service towards that thought.
Yeah, I think David Beckham plays football, and so people expect him to play football. I mean, he can come back and say, I can be a preacher, I can be a car mechanic, but he's known as a preacher. Right. Or he's going to be known as a football player. So I think McCanns of the world, the Ogilvies of the world, are stuck with being seen as advertising solution providers.
Right.
Whereas when we came into the market, we had no baggage. We were a bunch of young, fabulous young planners, got our minds together, and I think we could actually go about convincing people that we can actually come in there with business solutions. Truth be said, we went there with advertising solutions, but we gotten ourselves inside as business solution providers. And that really differentiates the marketplace.
And how has that been reflected in your hiring and how you staff? I mean, to me, it sort of expands into almost a business consultancy first, and we happen to then, our DNA tends to focus around marketing communication solutions.
Yeah.
So how do you look at when you hire, and how are you staffed differently from your competitors then that are maybe sort of burdened by these badges of ad agencies?
Yeah. one of the first few things we did, Don, was got on board a couple of young brand managers, a couple of young people from the marketing end, which actually gave us a lot of credibility in terms of the way we actually function. The key people, the key 4 or 5 people in the organization, the 3 co-founders of the company were strong account planners. So they spoke business. They did not speak creative. That's not in a good sense, not in a bad sense. They actually spoke business solutions to the client. And I think we chose clients which needed business solutions. We actually avoided clients which needed creative solutions. That actually made a sensible move for us to be successful the way we are. We chose the clients we want to partner with rather than having clients who we wish we could partner with, but they want advertising solutions only.
So when you crack an idea with the client, you're sitting around and it's a distribution issue, as you were mentioning, or whatever the actual business issue is, how does Law and Kenneth then take it and make the client comfortable that we understand all these different disciplines? Or is it just say, don't worry about it, we'll get it done, whether you outsource that or whether you have it in-house, you take over online issues, offline issues? How do you pull the integration together?
Don, I think the difference here is that we actually sit together and find solutions, but the challenges of implementation still exist. That's not changed.
Yeah.
Implementing a strategy or implementing a solution is still a challenge, and you still go through the rigmarole of doing great creative work or finding great distribution people on the back end or great sales people in the marketplace. But the partnership is much more earlier in terms of making the business work rather than making an ad work.
Okay.
So if you remember during our days in the Coke, we had to make an ad work. We had to get the voiceover right, we had to get the story right, and if you don't get the ad right, you're thrown out the window. Whereas here, when we actually sit with the client on business parameters, you're taking large ownership where client truly walks with you as a partner rather than making you a small fly in the wall and saying, you know something, your idea sucked. That's the reason my product didn't succeed in the marketplace. So I think broader responsibility has actually made us much more successful than being nitpicked for one aspect of the entire marketing and communication mix down. So I think that's where we've actually lucked out. That's what I would like to say, rather than being anything else.
Okay. If I was to look, let me ask you it this way. Looking through your eyes in the next year and a half, 2 years, what do you see coming down the pipe? What are the client issues? What's going on in the basically the marketing communication side, technology? What's something that you look at and go, wow, that's where we have to be. That's where, if we're not, I'm a bit concerned. That's where the industry's going. Some places maybe the industry's going where you don't want any part of it. But what excites you about the future from a marketing communications company's perspective?
Let me come from the business perspective. Don, there's this huge surge of Indian brands wanting to go abroad.
Right.
And that's been the wave is getting to be a tsunami in the next year and a half and 2. And as we speak, 90% of our business is our local clients will go global. For me, Ogilvy or McCann can't do that. Whereas I can do that faster because I can take a soap brand from here to anywhere in the world. Whereas you can't do that with any of the P&G aligned agencies or Levers aligned agency. So I see a great opportunity being an Indian agency to take potential large brands. I'm seeing what happened from the West into the East. We could champion that going from India across to the West. And I think that is where our story lies. If we can actually grab that wave, done, it's a different world for us altogether.
I see. What about in terms of consumers? What are you finding and how sophisticated they've got, the role social media plays, the fact that they now have a much stronger voice and say potentially on the success of brands, good and bad? You know, they can hold them hostage, they can hijack brands. What's your take on all this sort of marketing 3.0?
Don, I think the consumer has not changed much. The way he communicates to has kind of gotten faster. He says Twitter, he says Facebook, and he says blog, and it gets to you faster. Normally, you could kind of put the couple of letters in the dustbin or burn them in the corner and just kind of get over with it. But today, news gets out much, much faster. I think the challenge of responding to the consumer is the key task. the ability to kind of manage and sustain their expectations has to got to be much more faster than the days of saying something's gone bad. We got a week and 10 days before we kind of go out on a television commercial and make some changes. Today we got to react much more faster. So it's a dangerous world out there, Don.
But I'm sure you're coping just fine, Praveen. Let's talk about the perspective of the Indian creative product. My time in Asia, as you know, we developed some amazing creative. A lot of our partners developed some amazing creative. I'm trying to remember if you were there when Coke was doing that World Cup spot, and they went. We were their agency, but they went over to Whedon to first shoot it, and then Whedon shot it, and it was like, this is a travel commercial.
I suffered about it. I know, yeah, of course.
Yeah. So and there was this doubt: could India develop the quality, and we better get Whedon to come in and do this. Then it turned out that the quality of film and just with the Bollywood expertise, I mean the quality of product was superior, it's world class. Yet in the last year or so, there seems to have been a bit of a slip off in terms of, if you look at a con, for example, last year wasn't a great year for India after a couple of years previous to that. What's going on? Is this an insight to maybe clients demanding a business focus over the creative focus first, or?
Well. Going back to the first part of the question, I think there's been a huge revival of creativity in the country from the days we kind of used to work together. I remember the days where creative as a discipline did have many leaders. And I think in the last couple of years, thanks to a couple of very senior stalwarts in the marketplace, we have been able to kind of create a desire and a reputation for being a creative powerhouse. We're not as good, as powerful as the Singapores and the Bangkoks of the world, but we're getting there. It has changed much. And I expect Indians to be dominating that space in the next 5 to 6 years' time, Don.
So it was just a rough year last year.
What's that?
It was just a down year last year for you.
I would say it's a bad year last year, absolutely. We'll get there.
Well, listen, mate, as usual, we have so much to talk about, but time is become our enemy, as they say.
Sure, Don.
I appreciate the time together. As I say to everybody watching, I have nothing but respect for what you've done in your career. When I first met you, you were just an aggressive, polite young man, and you remain that. Always outspoken, and I think anyone listening wants to really understand how to be successful in a certain market and grow an agency, they should look at the Lawn Canada story and your background. And I'd love to have you back on again sometime and continue the conversation because we have so much to talk about. Praveen, thank you very much for being on BrandVertising.
Thanks so much, Don. Thanks for having me on board. Thanks again.
Okay. Take care of yourself this evening. reason I wanted to show that spot, that's from Whedon and Kennedy in India. Not the Whedon and Kennedy that's based in Portland, but the Whedon and Kennedy office in India. It's a fantastic example of the quality of craftsmanship and cinematography that exists in India. When you have Bollywood in your back door, just like the US has Hollywood in their back door, you can produce beautiful, beautiful work. It's one of the things about India that they always delivered on. Fantastic execution, beautiful casting, wonderful light and color, and just really, really fantastic writing. The thing is, though, this is what I was talking to Praveen about earlier, is India has slipped a little bit in its creative rankings in the last 2 years. Last year was their worst showing at Cannes. I believe they had 17 medals only after higher totals the year before. But as Praveen was saying in our conversation, he believes that India will rebound and the creative talent will come to the forefront as it always does. And that's why the two spots I showed you today, very different in tone. One's very gritty, it's an activation, but it's very simple and very pure, which is what India is to me in how it looks at the advertising challenges that they face. And I think that was the conversation that we're having with Praveen, is be smart, be different, understand the business. Business first, don't just live on creative idea alone. And I think that was the beauty of the conversation we had today. And I wanted to thank Praveen for taking the time to spend with us, and thank you for taking the time to watch BrandVertising right here on FuseLogic TV. Until the next episode of BrandVertising, have a good day.